Hello, good afternoon, and welcome. I'm Seema Sirohi. I'm a journalist based in Washington, D.C., and it's my privilege to introduce Chike Frankie Edozien. He grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and he learned to read, he tells me, from the newspapers his father brought home. And he became a storyteller par excellence. He also directs the Ghana-based Reporting Africa program. He's a journalist. He worked for the New York Post. He's broken many stories, and he's a force to contend with. So, so let me say at the very outset, Lives of Great Men is an extremely important book. It opens the door to a world that has remained hidden. We don't know much about it or anything at all. Chike's memoir is the first full-fledged account of what it's like to be gay in Africa. It spans several countries, takes us from Nigeria to Zimbabwe, to Uganda, to Ghana, and to the African diaspora in France and in the United States. Hard doesn't even begin to describe the lives of gay men who must live in the shadows, pretend to be heterosexual by day, complete with a wife and children, because homophobia is rampant. Double lives are common. You must learn to navigate carefully if you are an African gay man or woman. Chike paints compelling portraits. He takes us inside the world without apology or caution. The prose is explicit at times. There are many personal stories, some colorful, some sad, some uplifting. He uses them to shine the light on the politics of particular countries and their homophobic policies. So first of all, give us some background for those of us not familiar with the situation. If I were a male of, say, 20-something, an African male growing up there, what would life be like for me?
So it would depend on where you lived. There's been this narrative that the entire African continent is this hotbed of homophobia, and that gay people there do not exist, and when they do, their life is so cruel that it's hard for them to be anything else. But like any other stereotype, obviously, shades of it are true, but then also there are different realities. And one of the reasons, that I worked on this book was because there was a time a couple of years ago when country after country, the only thing that you heard of from the African continent vis-a-vis LGBT people were in Uganda, they're trying to kill them. In Nigeria, they're going to lock them up for 14 years and throw away the key and all of this stuff. And there was, much to my chagrin as a journalist, whenever international media went to these places to cover these truly horrific stories, whether it was CNN or The Guardian or the New York Times, they often seemed to cite this poll that would say 99% of the population supports this horror. And I found that not to be true in my existence growing up in Africa. I didn't move to the United States until I was 20 years old. And it was not reflective of the experience that I and my friends and other people that I knew had. So yes, I thought to myself, well, I could write a story about it, and I did, but it didn't seem to be enough because there was no reference point for journalists or for scholars or for people who want to think about our lives as to how rich and layered and textured our lives were. Even when they're difficult, even in our most horrific times, I found a lot of joy. And so when I was writing this book, there was a lot of joyful stories in there from people who were finding love and living their best lives under terrific circumstances.
Oh, it wasn't my intention to give the impression that it's all doom and gloom, not at all. I mean, your book is anything but that. It I think it's a book of hope as well. So
It's a love letter.
it's a love letter, yes. I love the phrase "good on paper" that you use to describe some of your prospective partners. What does that mean? Please tell us about it.
It's a different kind of GOP. So good on paper is very, very often, I think for most people, you don't even have to be a sexual minority to have this experience. Very often there are people that you meet and then you think, oh my God, this person's really cute and they're really smart and this would make an ideal partner, someone I can even bring home to my friends and my family. And they have a job and they have a degree and blah, 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 all the things that you tick off that you want in a partner. And then you get to know them and they're just like really shitty.
Not to put too fine a point.
You know, they're just really terrible people. They have no integrity. They have no, and all the things that you know, when you pull away from the surface, I think most people, when they meet people and they like them, very often, not all the time, there's a physical attraction first, and then there's the intellectual stuff later. But then when you get past the fact that this person's really good looking, and then you look at maybe their moral compass or lack thereof, then you say to yourself, why am I in this relationship? Why am I trying so hard just because someone looks nice? And so in my experience, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I had a lot of people that I would not let go of because they were good on paper. You know, I remember dating this terrible Italian for many years. Just a horrible, horrible situation. But I remember thinking that, you know, my friends would always say to me, but you wouldn't find anybody as good looking as that, you know. And I think a lot of people internalize that stuff. And so for me, it took me a while to forget those who were good on paper and to look deeper and to sort of like, you know, I had to ask myself the question, as a gay African person, do I really need to scrape the bottom of the barrel to have a relationship just because I felt a little bit isolated? And when I got to the point where I didn't have to do that anymore, I think I became a happier person.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the laws in various countries. I know
Yes.
things have changed, but just to contextualize the experience, in Nigeria by Goodluck Jonathan.
Yes. Goodluck Jonathan, for those who don't know, is the former president of Nigeria. In 2014, January, during the holiday time, I think it was maybe the day after New Year or 2 days after New Year, he quietly signed the most anti-LGBT laws on our continent. And these laws in Nigeria say that if you enter, it was called the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act. So if you enter into any kind of, or if you attempt to enter into any kind of same-sex relationship, you could go to jail for 14 years. If you're a member of any kind of club, that is like an LGBT club, you could go to jail for 10 years. And if you know someone who is gay and you don't turn them in or you don't report them, you could also go to jail. It was the most draconian laws that we have seen in a very long time in our country. And one of the terrible things about it was the international coverage of it, as I mentioned before, because everybody said, yeah, but you know, there's a poll that says everybody supports this, which was not true. And I don't think that Goodluck Jonathan is a bad person, but I do feel like he was at a point in time where his presidency was in tatters, and there was an election coming up a few months later. And this is a playbook that we have seen around the African continent, which is whenever anything goes bad in your world, the gay person is always the boogeyman, you know? And we've seen this, you know, from Nigeria to Ghana to Uganda to everywhere. It's like, you know, if there's a problem and government can solve it or churches can get more people to come in, there's these gay people coming to eat your children, and there's these gay people coming to take over, and they have lost in America, and they have lost in Europe. They're going down the drain. Africa is the next fertile ground, so let's get rid of them.
Right, that is what I wanted you to come to. There was a certain time where many African countries pass or tried to pass these laws.
Yes.
And there was a connection between the evangelical church here
Yes.
in the US and some preachers going to Africa, sort of talking about gay people, that the US is lost.
Yeah,
Now
they weren't really talking. They were aggressively. So there was one particular person in particular. His name is Scott Lively. He's out of Massachusetts. He's a preacher over there. And the way I always sort of tell people in Nigeria, Ghana, wherever I go, is that Scott Lively is an nonentity. Nobody knows him in America. I mean, you'd have to Google him to figure out who he was. He's not a household name. But in these countries, he was like the second coming of Christ. Here is this evangelical preacher from America, and they have found the way, and he and his group would have seminars after open-air services and saying, you know, for instance, in Uganda, the only way that you can keep Uganda for God and to have all these souls is if we get rid of the people who caused the Jews to be exterminated. I mean, he had a book called The Pink Swastika, where basically everything that happened wrong in this world, there was a gay person who did it. I mean, it's an awful book, but this was his agenda. And so at a certain point, country after country was basically taking these seminars and taking them to their legislatures and turning them into bills. Some of them didn't go anywhere, and some of them went someplace and were passed. And what we saw was not just that people in these countries believed that, but it became a situation where gay people who were on some level somewhat free, if they were discreet, had to go underground. Because then people got beat up, then people got lynched, then people got blackmailed. There are many, many examples of people who would be beaten up and you'd have to pay up because you now can't go to the police because your existence has now been made illegal, you know? And when people would say, oh, what are we doing about it? The Americans and the British, you have all this influence. And you had people like the former President Barack Obama who actually made LGBT openness one of the foreign policy agendas. And it now became this whole imperialist things where these governments would say, we've already been colonized once, don't colonize us anymore by telling us how to be. This is something that's American or British and we don't want it, you know? And that was the running narrative. And I said to myself, I grew up in one of Africa's most populous cities. I spent a lot of time in the Delta, which is very rural at the time. I have always known gay people. I never felt I was the only one. Where did they all go? That no reporter could find us. And so I started collecting stories, and that became the collection in Life's a Great Man.
So these draconian laws, or the threat of these laws, led to a phenomenon called, you know, the flight of gay people from, especially the most qualified, the educated, the doctors, the creative directors. They sought asylum in the US and Europe. You write, I wonder how many highly skilled professionals my country has lost and continues to lose because of its government-sanctioned homophobia. Our continent too often drives away its most precious resources, its own citizens, to the West, where, in an irony of history, their talent further benefits our former colonial overlords at the expense of those back home. So what's been the impact, the economic impact? That's got to hurt, right? I mean, it's got to register with the politicians.
Unfortunately, I mean, I see these things in many different countries, many different people. I think that there are certain kinds of gay people. And, you know, some of this has to do with access and privilege. So if you're born middle class, you probably have a passport. You probably have good tertiary education. And when you decide, I don't want to deal with this anymore, there is an industrialized nation waiting for your talent, whether you're a doctor or you're a very skilled manager or you're a nurse or you're something that is more valuable developing the African continent. And so there are so many people who tried in many different countries that I detail, and they've all moved to different places because they don't want to deal with it anymore. The reverse of that is the gay person who is not middle class, not upper middle class, has never had a passport, has never left his borders. What are they supposed to do? They get married like everybody else. And they live this sort of dual hidden life. But even those who have passports and high education and all of that, not all of them are able to escape the social stigmatization. So some of them also get married. I remember a friend of mine once telling me, you know, you're a professor, I'm a professor, but I can never get that promotion if I don't have a wife. You know, so it's not even that, it's not enough for him to be in the closet and to keep his personal life personal. He now has to actively go and display heterosexuality and virileness for people to say, okay, he's responsible enough to have a wife and maybe some kids. I can now give him a promotion to senior lecturer. It's hard.
Yeah, to put it mildly. Now, these people who are coming to the US to seek asylum over the years, how many of them are successful? What is the rate of acceptance? And under the current administration, have things changed?
No. I think most people who live in America today understand that there oftentimes are mixed messages that come out of the current administration. You know, for instance, the president, he has a openly gay person as a very high-level ambassadorial position. I think the ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, is openly gay. He has openly gay people in his press office. And he had a directive, a whole initiative that the Trump administration was going to pursue in countries around the world, acceptance for LGBT people. So now they trump this announcement and they make this big announcement that, you know, all of these countries around the world, we want you to not kill your gay people. And when it's Pride Week, you have the Secretary of State telling all the embassies, you can't have pride parties, you can't fly pride flags, you can't do anything gay. So it's not really schizophrenic, it just doesn't ring true. You know, I remember during the election, I think the president was one of the first major Republican candidates to stand on the platform of his party in Cleveland and wave the rainbow flag. And as soon as he got into office, we know that there have been many, many regulations, from banning trans people from serving in the military to stopping gay people from adopting children, that his administration have done things that seem to be in direct opposition to the positions that he takes. So I think for many people around the world, America is still sort of like this beacon of freedom, but we're in this moment of time when people are not really sure because the message is not clear. However, that being said, I live in New York City now, and one of the things that I do is I'm constantly, we have a network where when people come in here and seek asylum, very often they're jailed, they're put in prison until their case is gone through. And so there's a network of people where we go and visit people who, while they're waiting to see an immigration judge that decides whether they can stay in this country or they should be sent back. So people are still fleeing these countries, primarily because they've been outed.
So there's danger to their lives back home. And
yeah. I think for us Africans, many of us anyway, the danger is not really being gay. The danger is being bold enough to say so. The danger is not conforming. The danger is saying, no, I'm not getting married to this lady. I'm going to have a boyfriend. And it was like, how dare you? You know, you
so
can't
the danger is if you come out. And
yes. I mean, there's gay people who are happily in the closet because that's what works. And they can stay alive and they can thrive in their careers. There's so many examples of that. Unfortunately, I think as the world changes and as people get older and wiser, we know that the time on earth is not finite, and if you're trying to live your best life, being living this dual life can certainly take its toll.
Tell us about your family. When you came out, was there shock and awe? What?
I'm not sure there was awe.
And I mean, you have an encounter with your father that you describe very eloquently, that it was like and when he finally accepts, I guess, it's like end of the Nigerian civil war. After all the bloodshed, no one got an apology.
No, there was no I'm sorry, none of that stuff. But I think if people who are sort of like ethnic minorities, we have this culture where we don't always do the I love you thing. You're just supposed to understand that. So sometimes we also don't apologize. It's just like, okay, well, let's move on. So I have 5 brothers and 1 sister, and my parents were educated in America, and so my father was extremely traditional, and he was not pleased. I think that I don't really think it was a surprise to any of my family members that I was gay. I think it was a surprise that I was certain at 20, and that it was a position that was immovable, that there was going to be no change of mind at 25, there was going to be no big wedding at 30, none of those things. And I always tell people that coming out is not a one-time thing. You come out and you keep coming out forever and ever and ever. And every time you do something new, every time you meet somebody, it is a choice as to whether you are fully open with them. That's a form of coming out because you don't know how they'll react. And so I think for my dad, it was, I was being stubborn in saying this was not going to be a thing to change, and he should stop praying about it, because I was irritated one New Year that his prayer was that I wouldn't be gay anymore. And he said this prayer aloud in front of his children and his wife. And I was trying to text my boyfriend, Happy New Year. It was just like, this can't go on. And so we went into a room and we had this, I don't want to say an argument because I really didn't let him talk. It was a lecture, but it was the reverse of what was the norm. Usually it's the father telling you how to behave, and then I was sort of like lecturing him. And the lecture came with sort of like a caveat. I was like, if you cannot do this at this point, then you won't have me in your life, so think about what you really want. That is not an approach that I would ask people to do, because I don't think it is fair, but that is what I needed to do at the time. I think when you are different, any sort of difference, not just sexuality, whatever it is, and people aren't used to that, there's an amount of patience that we should try to have. Because I think, for someone like me who had thought about being gay and being different for a long time before I finally accepted it, I didn't think it was fair to ask my brothers to accept it immediately I told them, which they did. But my dad had had a few years of conversation, so I said to him, we just won't be together anymore if you continue trying to embarrass me like this. And I said, go and read up on these things. And I think at the time, Spain had just, my father is Catholic, and Spain had just had, they're one of the first countries that had a same-sex marriage. They had allowed it. And I think I said, Spain's a very Catholic country like you, but they're letting people get married, so let's not have this conversation again. And to his credit, he went and read up on stuff. And I was very happy that we were in a good place by not too long after. That does not always work with most African parents, because they want you to be your best self. And part of that for them is being able to rise up in society. And I come from a society where it's very difficult to rise up if you're not a responsible person. And what is responsibility? Responsibility is being able to have a family, a wife, a children, a family that is heteronormative, because I think LGBT people have their own families that they create. And so it was a bit tough for him, but he made it through. But what that taught me was that there is value in me saying to people, just because we're related, that does not mean that I have to deal with your own learning curve. Because I'd been on the receiving end of, in-laws and other distant relatives who tried to shame me, and I just shut it down. It's like, we don't have to have a relationship if you don't have a modicum of respect, not just for me, but for whoever I am with.
Your mother was relatively easier to convince, or?
I think so, but I think that's because she's a scientist. So she just, I think she prayed about it, and then that was it.
Good. So in your book, you describe many, many situations where you say so-and-so then got married and has a wife. Now, for the women who are married to these gay men, it cannot be easy, right? So as I was reading the book, I kept thinking about those women. How do they deal with it? Do they know in many cases that their husbands are gay, or do they not know? Is it enough to have a husband and, passport to life? Because, it happens in many countries, including in mine. In India, if you're married, it's bliss, and, forget the career, but forget everything else.
Yeah. So there is not one answer to that, because many of these women have different situations. But there is a common thread in West Africa, not just Nigeria, in Ghana, in Togo, everything. For a lot of women, it really doesn't matter how much money you have, whether you have 10 PhDs, how many businesses you have. If you don't have a husband, you're just nobody. That is the reality in my society. The degree that most people want next to your name is MRS. Mrs. somebody. You've got to be somebody's wife. You have to bring home a husband to your parents, and then that is your crowning achievement. It is an awful thing to say going into 2020, but this is the reality. So some of these women have decided that maybe they don't want to deal with this anymore. And so they will marry somebody who they know is perhaps not the heterosexual they might wish for, but he's a husband, and he's a good provider, and he pays, and he leaves me alone. There's that. There are also the women who get married because it's difficult to be a lesbian. You have to do something. I mean, I have a lesbian friend, and she was married to this man for a long time, who knew she was a lesbian, but hoped that she would be more bisexual than lesbian. And that lasted for a few years, and then they parted ways. And I have often been told in the last few years, when I used to be quite judgmental about people doing these things, and one of my uncles said to me, well, who told you marriage is about love? That's you being in America. Marriage is about families joining together. Marriage is about economics. Marriage is about a whole bunch of things. And so if my daughter is married to a gay man, I'm not giving back the dowry, and she needs to go work it out. So there's also that, where it's like, okay, you're expecting to marry somebody because you fall in love with them. That's your problem. If you live in this society, marriage is not always about love. It's nice if you have that, but it's about two good families coming together. It's about finding somebody who can be a good father or good mother to your children. And so for many people, marriage is not about finding the life partner, but it's finding the world partner that makes things better.
So you have one chapter on gay women, and it seems they're not in as much danger as gay men in many of the countries. They somehow manage to glide by or exist in this in-between space. They have clubs where they can go and dance together and things like that. What explains the difference in attitude of society towards gay men and gay women?
So there's two things. I mean, and I hope that in doing that chapter, I didn't I don't give the impression that it's not difficult for gay women, because it really is. But I didn't feel that that was my story to tell. So I have a couple of chapters that deal with the women that I know. There are women who are every day around the world, but certainly in Southern Africa and West Africa, who are subjected to corrective rapes. Because guys just think, you have to have a good man. You just haven't found the right one. And so they think that if they forcibly rape someone, that that person will become straight. And many people who dare to be openly lesbian are at risk of that. The other thing is just old-fashioned patriarchy. And when you're in the clubs and you see two women dancing together, the straight guys think it's all about they're dancing for their benefit. And so the idea that those two women might actually be a couple is not something that crosses their mind, because they just think that, once the woman finds a nice guy, they'll settle down, and that whole lesbian thing is a phase. It's a thing people do in high school. It's not something that you kind of like experiment with. And when you're done, you'll find a nice guy like me, a good, strong husband who can take care of things, to marry. And so for women around our continent, being openly lesbian is really frightening, because you could get violently attacked. And I think it's easier for women to find ways to cope than, say, certain men who just don't want to deal with it anymore. Because there's many men who have married women who they know are lesbians, but are happy to have a wife, and allow the women to do what they do in the privacy of their own homes. But it is a difficult thing being openly lesbian. It's really, really hard, because you could get killed. You could get killed being a gay man as well, but I think there's a special horrific anger that comes to some people when they are rejected totally.
By a woman?
Yes. And that can be really, really violent. I think with gay men, you can sort of put them down if you don't attack them, and just say, this is not a real person, or whatever it is. But with women, if a woman is resolute that she is a lesbian, and she's not interested, not just in you, but in any man whatsoever, that has been known to fuel a different kind of rage. And so, the example I always give is in South Africa. South Africa is a wonderful country, despite all of the issues that it has. It is the first country on our continent that has a constitution that is just absolutely marvelous, with protections for everyone. South Africa is the only country that we have where we have full-fledged marriage equality. For gays, lesbians, and heterosexuals on our continent. South Africa is also, even with all of its human rights laws, it's also the place that has the most corrective rape attempts on women. So yes, you have the law supposedly protecting them, and then you have women who have to be really careful, because some guy who they say they don't want to go out with could try to rape them and not feel anything about it.
Right. No, I can totally I get that, because we have a very similar situation in India. It's that if you refuse a guy, you could open yourself to an acid attack, which is like something that's happening in South Asia increasingly. It's horrific. Okay, my final question, because we should open it up to the audience. It's more a comment.
Comment away.
The life you describe, with all the difficulties, I'm not, sort of undermining that, is still rather privileged. The life you led, you holidayed in London as a kid, and you lived a comfortable life in Nigeria. Your friends have had destination weddings.
My gay friends.
Gay friends, yeah.
Gay people are fabulous.
So, as a journalist, journalist to a journalist, I became very curious about gay men who are at the bottom of society, the very poor, the underprivileged. Where do they go? What do they do?
So I have gay friends who are in that category. And unlike my other gay friends who could like rent out Scottish castles for their gay weddings, these ones can't do that. But of course, my friends who do these destination weddings tell me, well, if we could get married in Nigeria, we would. But since we can't, we're going to go to all these places. So I mentioned that I've had a certain arc in my life where at a certain point when I was maybe in my 30s, I used to think, it's just outrageous in this day and age for anybody to be in the closet. That's just crazy. I don't have those feelings of judgment anymore to people who get married because I have seen men who have found true love. And I detail some of those stories in the book. These are tailors, these are short order cooks, these are miners, these are just ordinary folk who've never been anywhere, and because they live in rural villages, what they have to do is to get married. That's part of the whole thing, and have children. And somehow in the middle of all of that, have been able to find a male partner that brings the smile to their faces, that makes everything worth living in a very, what I would find to be a very oppressive situation. And I talk about these guys because when I meet them, the joy is so palpable with the time that they have. I mean, there's this particular couple that I talk about. They meet once a month because that's the only time they can get away. And they've been in a relationship for 5 years, meaning once a month. And they spend one weekend with each other every month, and then they go back to their wives and children. And I ask them individually, together, okay, you've got this lovely wife and you've got these children. Who do you love more, honestly? Can you pick between your wife and your boyfriend? And they both picked each other. And there are several circumstances like that. So when I see, journalists come in and they tell the story about, these people in these countries and how 99% of the population is not this, and it's just a few who've gone abroad and have brought their wicked ways from America, I say, that's not what I know, because these people, you have not allowed them to have a free life, and so they've done everything that you expect of them. Wife, check. Children, check. Home, check. And they've still managed to find a way to find a love that keeps them smiling and going until the next month. So, yeah, I'm all for love. And I don't, I think we've talked a lot about the tough parts, and I don't want people to think that the book is just heart-wrenching. There's a lot of joyous stories.
You want to read a little bit?
If you want me to. Okay. Sadly, the part I'm going to read is not so joyous. This is about a young man I met in Accra. His name is Aziz, and when I met him, he wanted to be a model and an actor. Aziz is an Accra guy. He was born and bred in Nima, a densely populated neighborhood that is chock full of Muslims like himself. And when I met him, he still lived there just off the Kanda Highway. His family originally came from Mali, and they're ethnically Hausa. As well as being extremely crowded, Nima is one of the poorest districts in Ghana's capital city, and is predominated with families from the north, as well as from Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, Senegal, and all around West Africa. No matter where they come from, though, almost everyone there speaks Hausa. It is as blue collar as it gets, and family bonds there are strong. Though poverty levels are high, there is a sense of a tight-knit community. And some here, despite being wealthy, still mingle with the push carts and livestock, goats, cows, chickens, that stalk the narrow streets. Aziz had never lived anywhere else and knows no further community. He has lived, as he puts it, crowded with other Muslims forever. I am a Muslim, pure Muslim. I pray 5 times daily. I go to mosque. I recite Quran. But he also told me when I first got to know him back in 2014 that admitting his gay identity to his family, which he did in 2008, unleashed such a backlash in the area that he's still in shock. Even these many years later, the feelings are so raw, and the memory triggers a torrent of tears from the otherwise jovial Aziz. He says he was just 22 and dating a man in Nima when a cousin of his happened to see him in the man's home wearing nothing but his boxers. The man was rumored to be gay, The friend told another cousin, and the legendary Ghanaian rumor mill began to churn. After having people in the community spy on him for a while, Aziz's mother, sisters, aunts, and uncles summoned him. They called me and asked, "Are you gay?" Actually, my heart jumped. I got scared. I'm from a big family, very well-known family. In Hausa, they say, "Dan Daudu." Do you sleep with men? The accusations made by a large group of relatives, folks he had always been close to, unnerved him. But his torture was just beginning. The term Dan Daudu, or in some places Yan Daudu, can be loosely translated as not just gay, but femininely gay, and is often highly pejorative. Aziz was cornered, but he didn't deny it. He looked them in the eye and owned up. He owned his destiny. I said, "Yes, I do." His defiance was courageous, but it wasn't a freeing moment. The family began verbally attacking him, and it all went downhill from there. Trust me, it was very difficult. It was bad. I didn't know what was going on. They confronted him with the names of men he had visited in the area, 4 of whom he had slept with. They knew much about it. So when they asked me, I didn't deny. I was shocked and surprised, and it was embarrassing. I was 22, very young and beautiful. They were so mad. They called me names. Banza, it's like outcast. But his humiliation didn't end there. Admitting was one thing, but refusing to change his ways was a whole other drama. They asked me to stop. I shouldn't be gay. I said, I can't change my sexuality. I can't be straight. I can't be normal. It is who I am. Since the shaming wasn't enough, they then told his father, who hadn't initially been present, and then all hell really broke loose. His father fetched a dagger and tried to cut him. Aziz ran from room to avoid being stabbed, and that was the end of him living in the home he had grown up in. His father chased him out, and as if that wasn't enough, his father then burned all my stuff, my clothes, my documents, my high school papers, everything. Aziz was taken in by a maternal aunt who lived nearby. In Nima, quarters are so tight, he knew nowhere else to go further afield. More cripplingly, he was left with no proof of education or even identity. He had to start over. Father and son have not spoken in over 6 years. He's nearby, but he doesn't want to see me. He despises me, Aziz says, in that matter-of-fact way that says either he's come to terms with the rejection or is pushing down deep pain. He hates me. During this time, his mother passed on. Aziz is certain he's not the only gay one in the family, just the one who had the misfortune to be exposed. I have cousins who I know are gay. It's very difficult. His maternal aunt, the one he went to live with, continually asked him to pray to change and also to try to make overtures to his father, as do his 2 sisters who live in Germany. These women are the few family members he's on good terms with. He speaks to some of his brothers, but they don't accept him. His work in commercials is seen as a gateway to homosexuality and is not lauded as a worthy career choice. While he's let go of the fear, the hurt lingers and anger has crept in to stay. He has no plans to make up with his father because he's still furious at him. More recently, he's been in a relationship with a man who was supposedly heterosexual and had girlfriends. Aziz claimed he loved the sex and pretended to be the man's buddy to keep it going. I think he craved intimacy far more than the sex and would take it in any form he could get it. The relationship cracked when the boyfriend, despite being straight, began getting jealous and accusing Aziz of cheating on him with other men. After that, he refocused on his career. Back in 2014, Aziz had no plans to leave Nima, but said if he got a chance to escape Ghana entirely, he would love to. I want to run from Ghana so I can have my life, my gay life, and wear the colors of gay. I want to be gay, fully gay entirely. I remember an urgent message I got from him the following summer in 2015, saying he had found his way to California and begun his long, hard slog to claim asylum and live freely. We emailed back and forth about lawyers and resettling, and he began the process, but his American dream was slow to materialize. While he waited for approval to work, living hand to mouth, his struggle continued. Aziz was ultimately granted asylum in 2016 and settled in the Bronx, trying to begin all over again.
Very nice.
It's unfortunate that Aziz is no longer interested in being an actor and a model. He just wants to have a job and to live. But Aziz is not an anomaly. There are so many people, families, men, women, who escape and begin again in our country, in the West. And you just never know who's lost what when they start again and are seeking asylum here because they're gay or lesbian.
So we'll open it up for questions if anybody.
So we're going to open it up for questions. If I could say just a few things. I have a long list of sponsors to read at the end. If you would bear with me and stay seated for just a few minutes while I go through the list, I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much. So any questions, please raise your hand.
I'm wondering about, like, I haven't heard any mention about your relationship with that one sister. And also, I'm wondering, how do you have to disguise who Aziz is and where he's from? Because there was enough information in that to find him or his family. And if that's out to the world, I just wondered how, like, in reality, that, you know, the risk level works and how insidious that all is.
Sure. I think one of the things that I have learned and I have enjoyed in writing memoir is that this is creative nonfiction is real, everything is true, but I also have the responsibility in telling my story and the stories of others to make sure that I do no harm. So Aziz and the other people mentioned in the book, there are precautions that I took for those who were not out. And there were some people in the book who wanted me to tell their story without disguise. So when you pick up the book, you'll see a portion where it says that some names have been disguised and some names are true. So it depends on the individual. Aziz, in his case, wanted me to tell his story, but didn't want me to use his family names or things that could bring him further problems with his own family. Thank you, though. My sister is awesome. She's amazing. She's really wonderful, and she gets along extremely well with my partner, so that makes me happy.
Oh.
Would you say the anti-gay prejudice is more cultural or religious, or what is the origin and what's perpetuating it?
So it's not cultural because in West Africa where I grew up, we have had in our history, and part of the historical work I did was detailing our relationships with non-heterosexuals over the years, over the generations. So we have always had, we're not very good with labels, but we've always had people that were not in heterosexual marriages. We have a history and a culture of woman-woman marriage. We've had all sorts of situations. It is only in recent time that we have dived into homophobia. And sadly, much of that came with religions that are not indigenous to where we come from, which are Islam and Christianity. Because our indigenous religions don't have that. They don't have a place for homophobia. No shade to the Christians and Muslims among us. It's just fact. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Thank you for all that.
Thank you for coming.
Your energy is beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if you're seeing any change in the younger generations happening, if there's a different dialogue starting to happen there.
There absolutely is, and it's as a result of the internet. So when I was growing up, we didn't have the internet. We did not know that you could challenge what people said to you. And young people today, I'm very fortunate because I'm also, the other hat that I wear is as I lecture in the university, so I'm in contact with so many young people. And young LGBTQ people in these countries have information from the internet, and they know things even before they happen. And so they also use the internet to date, but so they also use the internet to sort of challenge the preconceived notions that their parents have. And a lot of them are a lot more courageous than it seems. But if you're in that world, you know that many of them are not embarrassed at all, or don't have the burden of shame that those in my generation did in dealing with their homosexuality. They just know that it's a thing that they have to navigate. It's like being bilingual. You know, you're one way with your parents, but when you get online, you're just everything else. So there is a shift that's come in, and they're bold, and they organize pride parades and pride events, and even if it's undercover, they do things that I would never have dreamt of doing when I was in their age, because not that I didn't want to get hurt, but I didn't want to be embarrassed. Yeah. So, microphone here.
Just a specific question. Does
Hey!
Boko Haram...
Hi.
Hi. Does Boko Haram play a especially prominent role in the homophobia problem in West Africa, or not?
So for those of you who don't know what Boko Haram is an extremist group in northern Nigeria. The name actually can loosely be translated to Western education is forbidden. Boko Haram has been fighting an insurgency game against the Nigerian government going on for 20 years. I think most people in America, their first experience with Boko Haram was when they kidnapped the women in Chibok, and former First Lady Michelle Obama made rescuing those girls an issue. So that's when I think most people in this part of the world had knowledge of Boko Haram. But for us in Nigeria, Boko Haram has always been there. They are very extremist. They kidnap both boys and girls. They take young girls and they marry them off, and they try to convert people into a strict form of Islam. I don't think that they really have any influence in what the government does, but they don't like anything. So them being anti-gay is just another long list of things they don't like girls going to school, like anybody at all going to school. And it is a complex but simple situation when you deal with extremists. You know that, okay, they hate everything. And they want to see us in the medieval world because they feel like education has taken people and only allowed certain people to benefit. So why bother with it? But I don't think that they have any influence on how people view same-sex relationships. People are just afraid of them because they kill you.
There's a question here.
Hi.
Hi. I'm a medical person, so I have a question about AIDS and HIV and your feeling about that, and, you know, not only the fear of coming out and all that, but there's also the fear of AIDS and HIV.
Yeah. HIV is an infection. It's, I think in much of the world, it's, the numbers are larger with heterosexuals. I specifically don't touch a lot on HIV in my book because I think the idea that HIV is synonymous with gay people is just wrong. And so, yes, there's a lot of gay people who have HIV, including in Nigeria and West Africa. But I don't think it's a big focus for me and for many of them who just want to get treatment if they get infected, because we also have a lot of straight people who have it. And so in compiling the book together, I consciously made an effort not to make it a HIV book, because being gay and dealing with STIs are not synonymous. Everybody deals with them. So in the book, I don't talk a lot about HIV, but I do mention specific instances of people who have it and the struggles they go through to get medication for it.
And that's my next question, if I may ask it.
Sure.
Like you were speaking about being in a more privileged area. If there are the other below that, do they get the care that they need and the medication? Is it more difficult?
So I think in many of these countries around West Africa that I work in a lot, if you are HIV positive, you can get the medication, but it's usually through government-run entities, because those entities are usually working with, for instance, the American government for a few years had something that was called the, I think it was the Presidential Response, PEPFAR is the, I don't know the full name. And what PEPFAR did was to arrange for many of these countries to have access to antiretroviral therapy. And now there is something called pre-exposure prophylaxis and post-exposure prophylaxis. And with these organizations, they give them to governments, and the governments now distribute them through organizations that do sexual health work. So everybody can have access to them. It's not really a privileged thing. But the issue is, are you going to go to a place where people would know that you have HIV? And then all the stereotyping that comes with that. So a lot of the organizations doing that work have been very careful to sort of project just a clinic atmosphere rather than a sexual health therapy atmosphere, because that pushes people from coming.
I just want to add one small bit of information to this. When the AIDS epidemic was at its height, and the treatment was really expensive because it was dominated by US pharmaceutical companies, and came along an Indian company called Cipla that sort of reverse engineered the treatment and provided it through the United Nations to African countries at a very, very low price. It was subsidized by various foreign governments, by the US, and President Bill Clinton had to be persuaded to sort of join this effort because, you know, the big pharma was completely opposed to that. So the treatment is quite affordable, and it's all subsidized in Africa and Asia as well.
Thank you very much. I think we need to close here, unfortunately. Please
I
feel
can take more questions at the table outside.
Exactly. Chike will be signing his book right outside those doors. So thank you so much, Chike. Thank you so much, Seema.
Thank you.
This was wonderful and very enlightening. I just want to read a few things. Please know that JLF Colorado provides free access and year-round free outreach workshops for at-risk and underserved students in the Denver metro area. Please donate. This is a very worthy cause. This is also why, thanks to your donation, this is why we can have the Jaipur Festival here year after year, so please consider donation. 100% of your donations go directly to the festival production and outreach programs. I'm gonna, please also support your public library. And I asked you to bear with me. I have a list of sponsors that we need to thank for their support. Again, thanks to them, we're here today hearing Chike and Seema. So Z Entertainment, Boulder Library Foundation, City of Boulder, Boulder Public Library, National Endowment for the Arts, Motwani Jadeja Foundation, Tampa Bay Literary Society, Organic India, Anchor Point Foundation, Bhakti Chai, Colorado Creative Industries, Consulate General of Canada in Denver, Community Foundation serving Boulder County, Shambhala Publications, Highland City Club, Hilton Garden Hotel Boulder, CBS 4 Denver, Brock Media, KGNU, Denver Post, Daily Camera, Boulder Weekly, CPR, Boulder Bookstore, America's Latino Eco Festival. I'm about halfway. Bear with. BMOCA, Bodicare Theater and Dairy Arts Center, Boulder Chamber of Commerce, Boulder County Arts Alliance, Boulder International Film Festival, Boulder Oli, Boulder Rotary, Peace Builders, Boulder Valley School District, Boulder Writers Alliance, Center for Asian Studies, CU Boulder, Colorado Talking Book Library, Dean of Arts and Sciences, CU Boulder, EcoCycle, Eldorado Water, E-Town, Honest Tea, I Have a Dream Foundation Boulder, International Business Circle, Lighthouse Writers Workshop, Kim and Jake's Bakery, and just a few more. Lucky's Market, Maya Productions, Ozo Coffee, Right Relationship, Titulia, Tibet Kitchen, and Multimedia Audiovisual. Thank you so much for your patience.